Hi, I'm Ted London, Senior Research Fellow at the William Davidson Institute, and I'm here with David Griswold, Founder and President of Sustainable Harvest Coffee. David, thanks for taking the time to talk.
Thanks for inviting me.
So you founded Sustainable Harvest Coffee in 1997. Can you tell us a little bit about why you founded the company and a little bit of its early history?
I'm a little bit of a different sort of business person because I came out of an interest in international development. I had worked in nonprofits and had done a lot of overseas work, and I thought there must be a way that I could have a product that could help a community, because I was really interested in helping village communities where actually coffee comes from. So I got in the coffee importing business actually in the early 90s and learned the trade, and in 1997 I started my company, Sustainable Harvest Coffee Importers. So that's what we do. We import fair trade, organic, and traceable coffee. And as an importer, I work with a lot of growers around the world, and I sell to coffee roasters.
So now you've been at this now coming on 20 years. Can you tell us a little bit about the journey over the 20 years or so that you've been running the company?
It's been an interesting journey, to say the least, in terms of whenever you start a business, you sort of can look back, especially when one has become somewhat successful, and think, oh, how many places I could have gotten off the train and decided I wouldn't continue to go. But this journey was interesting because I decided to work with small farmer cooperatives, farmer associations, and in these rural communities, I decided that was sort of the group that I wanted to try to support and teach them how to participate in global markets. Because when I started in coffee 20 years ago, it was a very opaque, non-transparent situation, and growers didn't know who they were selling to, and buyers didn't know where they were getting their coffee from. And I wanted to change that and have people be able to sort of know who they were buying from and essentially have a relationship with those people.
So that's a big part of the company now, is this relationship-based model of transactions with the growers and the roasters. And can you talk a little bit about the position you've taken in the value chain and what the real value proposition is that the company offers?
The relationships are one way of doing business. The way business is typically done in a coffee commodity or almost any commodity chain is one where there's not a lot of traceability, or people don't really know where they're buying from, and it's kind of a win-loss kind of situation, like most business. And I thought maybe there's a way in coffee to create a relationship-based model where the buyers knew who they were buying from and the growers knew who they were selling to, and by doing that they could sort of make longer-term plans and work out problems together. So to do that, you need to be kind of in the middle. So the the middleman position was the coveted spot I took, and it's a very unenviable position because it's high capital, high risk, and low margin. So there's only a few players that can really play, because you really have to be a very large company to sort of stay afloat in the importing business in a commodity. So that's what I decided to do, and it took me a long time to sort of build up to where we are now, to where I could really compete with some of the really big houses in terms of price and services on importing. But it was also a very advantageous position to be in as an importer, because you get to deal both with the grower side and with the roaster side, and you can kind of bring them together. You really get a choice. You can either choose to bring them together or keep them apart. And typically people had chosen to keep people apart because that's where you can make money. And I thought, let's try it if we bring people together in kind of a circle that's transparent.
And this transparency applies both ways in the supply chain, your relationship with the farmers and your relationship with the roasters. Can we talk a little bit first about the relationship with the farmers? I know that you worked with now more than 200,000 farmers, often through local cooperatives. Can you give us a little more insight into how that relationship actually works? What's the value you're trying to create for those farmers?
Sure. Yeah, you're right. We work with about 200,000 growers, and that's through about over 100 farmer organizations. So these are generally, farmer organizations may have 75 to 3,000 members, and these farmers come together. They aggregate their coffee beans with their cooperative, and those are the entities that we chose to work with. Now, these entities, these cooperatives, they run a whole gamut of business acumen. Let's say some of them are very well organized and well resourced, but most of them are really challenged in terms of how much business knowledge they have, how well they run their systems, what kind of infrastructure they have, and especially how much liquidity or cash how much they can get in terms of loans. So the biggest challenge that we face is trying to strengthen these small growing businesses into really strong businesses that can compete globally, because as our partners, they have to deliver, literally millions of pounds of coffee every year to us, and we need to make sure it comes without a hitch.
When you work with these cooperatives, sort of there's an implicit assumption that they can be representative of the growers they serve. Do you feel that that's the case in general, or are there some things you need to do to make sure that you really are hearing the voices of the growers as it comes through the cooperatives?
One can't assume that just because you're working with a cooperative that everything's fine and everything's going to be working well and that the growers' needs and voices are being heard. I think you really have to figure out ways that you can go in and vet how are the farmers being treated, and there's a couple ways we do that. One is that most of our coffees are fair trade certified. So in addition to being a seal that many roasters in the United States want to carry because it says that farmers got paid a minimum base price for their coffee, the fair trade certification also goes in and looks at the cooperative and sort of vets a lot of the numbers and sees how much did farmers actually make across all the beans that they sold. So you get a sense of how much did the farmers get. So let's say if the fair trade price is $1.90, we know that the farmers aren't making $1.90, but we can know, are they making 27 cents less or 30 cents less, because that information comes out to us. Some cooperatives are more organized and more efficient than others, and I think where we found the biggest challenges is where there's not a lot of transparency, where maybe a co-op, we've had this case in some co-ops in Africa, for example, where they choose not to become fair trade certified, and we realize there isn't a lot of transparency, and and those are really troubling situations because you realize that the members are not getting well served. And then your question is one sort of asks themselves, well, what can we do to sort of impose our will? What can we do as a marketplace player to say, this is what our customers want? Those are some really interesting challenges to face.
I'm sure other enterprises have faced this challenge or are facing this challenge of sort of how do you actually really make sure that you're getting down to the base of the pyramid. So given that context that you've had some difficulties with these cooperatives, they may not be fully transparent, they may not be communicating in a rich way with regard to their members, what strategies have you employed or have you seen deliver some success?
The strategies to sort of get a better sense of how the co-op is running and how the members are being treated. One is that we usually interface with a number of players within the cooperative management, not just the director, but also the taster, the finance person, the logistics person. And we don't just sort of get to know them, but we actually invite them to an annual gathering that we have that we call Let's Talk Coffee. So all the tasters get together, all the logistics people get together from all these different cooperatives, and they become sort of a guild that work together. And that's where a lot of good information can get passed, where people can learn best practices from other farmers and from other entities. So that's one way. And the other way is that our staff, we have offices at Origin. So our staff, which are people who speak several languages and are often local people, will go and visit several times a year the cooperatives we work with. So it's a little harder for somebody to sort of hide if there's a real there's some disgust or some uncertainty about how their cooperative is treating the members. It usually comes out pretty easily. You can kind of sense it almost when you walk in the door.
Something that you've talked about before, which I think is really interesting when you think about coffee, is you use the example of the wine industry, and the winemakers can taste their final product and understand what they need to do to improve, either that batch or future batches. It's not true with farmers. They never taste the final product, or almost never. How do you bring that information back to farmers so they can really understand what the value proposition is from their product and where they might need to improve?
It's really true that we often want to equate coffee, especially coffee, with wine, but there's some really big differences. And the fact that a vintner can not only taste his wine, but he gets to put it in a bottle, and that's the bottle that's on your table at night. In coffee, there's a whole myriad of ways that you can screw up what the farmer sends you. The roaster can over-roast it. You can do a bad extraction when you make your coffee at home. And so understanding what your product tastes like is absolutely essential. And this actually came out of personal experience because, as I mentioned, I got into coffee because I was interested in finding a way a product could do some social good, a way that we could take money out of the importing and put it back into training farmers to be better and more competitive at what they do. But I wasn't a huge coffee taster myself. And so for a long time, my company struggled a little bit because I was trying to sell coffee to roasters who were saying, so what are you tasting in the cup? And often I hadn't tasted. I just knew that I'd gone to the farm. It was a delightful story, and it really hurt my status in the industry not to be a taster. So I decided not only would I learn how to taste and sort of get the tools that professional tasters need, but I decided in my company I would make it a really important aspect. So there's a system of professional tasting called QGrader, stands for quality. It's an international system. And we have now 16 professional tasters in my company out of a staff of 38. And that's more than any other coffee company has. But what was more important about that is that that helped me understand you need a common language of taste. So what about the cooperatives? What about the farmers? Could they taste? So we have trained over 200 of our suppliers to be these same QGraders. So we taught them exactly how to score their coffee, and this is on a point system, much like a wine spectator. So when we say we need you to ship us a coffee that gets an 84 or above score, which would be a very good tasting coffee that's specialty, whether it's a Peruvian or a Honduran or a Tanzanian farmer, they have somebody on staff now who has the tools and the roaster and the ability to cup these coffees or taste these coffees and really deliver that. So the individual farmers probably still aren't tasting all of their coffees. You know, think about 3,000 farmers delivering their beans to a cooperative. They may taste a little bit of what good coffee tastes like, but there's somebody now in that entity, in that small business organization, who knows exactly what they're sending. And what was interesting is that when I first started in coffee in the early 1990s, and I was down in Mexico, I would watch how the cooperative had a big barrel of sample. It had been all picked over. It was beautiful, pristine coffee that they would just, put a shovel in and put it into a little bag and send it up to a broker in New York. And of course, the broker would taste this coffee and say, "This is marvelous. Ship it." And then whatever was really being shipped would get shipped. And they were kind of like, "It's just coffee." But it's not. It's really, you have to deliver the right thing. And so we have the lowest rate of rejection now in the industry because we've trained all of our suppliers, who are not part of our company, but they're our suppliers, to be tasters.
Thinking about your buyers, the roasters, how do you build a relationship model with them?
With the roasters, it sort of happened as part of maybe a new wave of coffee buyers who wanted to travel more, who wanted to know more about the farmer behind their fork. It was sort of a movement in food that was sort of taking over the United States that when I first started wasn't really there. There were a lot of people who, I remember one time I brought a number of Mexican growers up to a coffee importer, a coffee roaster, and said, "Here's our story, here it is." And the guy said to me, "Look, I go fishing with my importer, and that's all I need to know about my coffee." And of course, I had to explain that to the coffee farmers, that it wasn't about the story or everything I'd been telling them. It was really about a different kind of relationship. But that world has changed. Now, to compete in specialty coffee, people need to know where are they getting their coffee, what are the conditions, the social, the environmental, but especially the cup quality, why does it taste the way it tastes? So the relationship now is being driven by buyers wanting to have direct relationships with growers. And my model, with having our offices overseas and having such transparency, leverages them to do that across their entire portfolio of coffees. Because nobody can travel really effectively 2 or 250 days out of the year to keep visiting farms. And so we've been able to scale those relationships by really allowing people, sort of setting the table for a roaster so they can have direct relationships that are fully transparent.
And you've talked about this change in the perspective of the roasters to be more interested in understanding sort of, if you will, the farmer behind the fork. That's one change. Do you foresee more changes in the coffee industry, and how might that impact the relationship model that you've created?
Yeah, clearly across, especially larger companies, there's a focus on sustainability. What's the impact of our purchases? If we're going to buy coffee in a certain way, can it do more than just go into somebody's pocket? Can it improve the livelihoods? Can it improve the village? There's a big focus on metrics. What's the impact? Now that's hard for growers. They're just busy trying to grow coffee, and so now they're being asked, so how much have things improved? Can you fill out these metrics forms and things like that? There's certifications they're being asked to do. So as the world changes and people want more information and they use third-party systems, that's just more and more work sort of heaped on the farmer's back, who's already growing coffee at what is right now sort of break-even prices. So part of what we try to do with our model is invest in systems, technologies, and other ways to sort of ease the load on those farmers. They still have to get the information across, but maybe there are ways that we can help them do it easier. But there's a lot of demands that come from roasters now because consumer demands are increasing. They want better pictures, they want video, they want YouTube uplinks that they can sort of share to make people excited about the coffee. How do you deliver all of that? And that's what Sustainable Harvest tries to figure out, as well as delivering the beans.
It seems that what you want to do is create a greater relationship between the final purchaser and the farmer. And that's sort of an evolution now in the coffee industry. Where do you see that going? What's next, either for that trend or what's the next trend on the horizon?
It's an interesting question. Being an importer, we're not a consumer-facing brand, but we're always thinking about what consumers might want. What would it be like if you put your K-Cup cartridge into which is the Keurig cup? What if you put that in and it launched a video of what was happening down in Ethiopia today, or something that happened in Nicaragua last week that sort of brings to life where your coffee is coming from? What if you could have that kind of traceability? What if you could essentially have a Facebook relationship with the farmer who's providing you with coffee? It's going to happen in other products. What's interesting for Sustainable Harvest is figuring out in a global marketplace where there's so much distance and so much difficulty working with these individual or atomized farmers that are grouped in these small businesses or associations, how can you give them the same tools so that they can compete at these sort of higher paying markets? Because consumers want to know more about their products.
So you are now a $70 million plus company. Can you talk a little bit about the growth you see in the future for your enterprise?
We've been lucky to have a lot of growth, although with growth comes so many new problems in business. How do you finance growth? How do you manage your staff that sometimes as you grow to a certain size, people who've been with you suddenly you need new people sort of can handle the larger stages. So as a business founder, it's just been very interesting and sometimes challenging emotionally to sort of see what growth, because it seems on paper, my goodness, you've gone from a $3 million company when you moved to Portland in 2000, now you're at 70 million. But I sort of see it all as a big learning curve, and there's a lot of people I can sort of ask for help along the way as I try to figure this out. What I see in the future is I see both sides, the smaller boutique roasters coming and wanting to work with us more because they want to really differentiate their coffees from the big mainstream coffees, and they need to tell stories, and they need to do it in an effective, efficient way. So we get a lot more of those people. And what I like about that part of the market is it's very, very high-end coffees. It's really sort of the very tip of the pyramid of the coffees. And that's fun for my tasters and my staff at Supply to go find those. But then we do 1 out of 6 pounds of fair trade organic in North America, and I think that'll increase. So that's also, we've learned how to do a lot of volume and really consistently bring in coffee without any rejections. Because if coffee gets rejected, you can't really send it back to the farmers, and you have to find another buyer, and it's problematic for everybody. So trying to figure out how to have sort of an error-free system is really where we're going. On the horizon, I see a lot of the big houses, the major brands, trying to figure out how do they have their own version of direct trade, even though it's hard to imagine, a big canned coffee having a direct trade relationship. But they're really looking at how do we step into something where we can know where our product comes from. And it's usually out of these sort of these big media stories about how maybe your phone is being made, or how maybe the people that make your clothing were treated, or some kind of food scare that really brings people back to, do we know really how our supply chain works? And so Sustainable Harvest is always going to try to push the frontier of what's possible in transparency.
Looking ahead, you're 70 million in coffee now. Do you have a sense of how big the company will be as a coffee importer in the future? And also, have you thought beyond coffee into some other areas?
Yeah. It's an interesting question about sort of the business growth, because I remember when I first did my sort of strategic plan, and I was way off because I thought we would be about a $15 million company right now. So I think it's hard for me sometimes to sort of imagine, are we going to be 150 million? We do have sort of 30% growth annually, so I should probably do the math and realize where we'll be in 5 years. But sometimes, as a business person, I'm kind of happy. I feel like these will be the days that I look back on as kind of the halcyon days of where it was a staff of 40, where I still knew everybody. And I don't know if I'm eager to sort of double or triple, because that's not necessarily my goal. My goal was more to sort of try to crowd the space with competitors who will now try to imitate what we do and be more of a model than necessarily sort of try to become one of the big three in coffee. So for me, growth will happen, I think, just naturally, but it's not something that we're going to pursue. Diversification of customer base is really important to us, just to have a lot of different kinds of customers. And then the question about other products besides coffee. There's a lot of interest in the cocoa industry. I'm not sure if it might be better for us to just help people do the relationship model in cocoa rather than just import the cocoa beans. And I suspect we'll do a Let's Talk Cocoa kind of event with our Let's Talk Coffee next year just to explore that space.
So as you think about diversification out of coffee, is it going to be that you will actually enter a new field in the future, or will it be that you use the model and almost franchise it, or to other organizations, or will it be that you just sort of become a common good that you want to share what you've learned across industries? Do you have a sense of which of those three models might be more robust for both your enterprise and for you personally?
Well, there's a couple of things that we see on the horizon. One is we have a lot of knowledge and a lot of depth at Origin, where these emerging markets, Colombia, Brazil, Peru, even in East Africa, where I think there's specialty coffee is going to arrive. So I think there's a play for us somewhere there. I think that there's a way for us to be somewhat of a brand for some people that are looking at, really traceable direct trade coffee, with certifications buttressing the claims that are made, third-party certifications. So we're exploring that. And then these Let's Talk Coffee and Let's Talk Cocoa, these events, they're very large in scale. They're some of the biggest coffee gatherings that are happening in Central America internationally. So that is an interesting area because we're very good at not just having conversations, but bringing supply chains together and really thinking about how do you sort of bring the TED Talks to a coffee event so that people really learn. Because people have too many conferences to go to. So it's more like how do you create a gathering where everybody learns and people get a lot of business done. And I think that we've figured out that to some degree, so we'll probably explore that further.
David, thanks for taking the time to talk today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.